Going Digital, California's textbook project.
California has a new program called the Digital Textbook Initiative.
Starting this fall, with high school math and science, we will be the first state in the nation to provide schools with a state-approved list of digital textbooks.
That was Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger in June, talking about his effort to get schools to use materials available free online. He listed reasons why he thinks digital textbooks make sense. California approves traditional textbooks in 6-year cycles. Digital ones can offer the latest information. They lighten the load of school bags, they save paper and trees, and make learning more fun and interactive. And lastly, he said, they help schools with their finances. The state has had to make severe cuts in school spending because of deep financial problems. More than 6 million students attend California public schools. Earlier this year, California invited content developers to offer digital math and science materials for high schools. These had to meet at least 90% of the state's learning requirements. Specially trained teachers examined 16 textbooks and approved 10 of them. 6 of the 10 were published by the CK-12 Foundation. Co-founder Nero Khosla says the nonprofit group had been developing digital science and math books for about 2 years. The foundation paid teachers and other education professionals to write and edit them. The money came from a group financed by the Khosla family. The Amar Foundation also supports projects in India. California cannot require schools to use the digital textbooks. Individual school districts will have to decide for themselves. Susan Martimeau, a California Department of Education official, says she does not expect widespread use right away. Her best guess is that some schools with a lot of technology will be the first to use them, but only in addition to their traditional books. School administrators point out that the texts may be free online, but students need a way to access them. Not everyone has a computer or electronic reader. Schools could print out copies, but that would not help the environment. Also, there is the cost to train teachers to use digital textbooks effectively.
The Devil and Tom Walker by Washington Irving.
Our story today is The Devil and Tom Walker. It was written by Washington Irving.
Before we begin our story, let us go back 300 years to the late 1600s. In those years, one of the most famous men in the world was Captain William Kidd. Captain Kidd was a pirate. He sailed the seas, capturing any ships he found. He and his men took money from these ships. Captain Kidd hid this money in different places. Captain Kidd was captured by the English in Boston, Massachusetts, and executed in the year 1701. From that time on, people all over the world searched in many places for Captain Kidd's stolen money. The people who lived in Massachusetts in the 1700s believed Captain Kidd buried some of his treasure near Boston. Not far from Boston was a small river which ran into the Atlantic Ocean. An old story said that Captain Kidd had come up this river from the ocean. Then he buried his gold and silver and jewels under a big tree. The story said that this treasure was protected by the devil himself, who was a good friend of Captain Kidd. In the year 1727, a man named Tom Walker lived near this place. Tom Walker was not a pleasant man. He loved only one thing: money. There was only one person worse than Tom. That was his wife. She also loved money. These two were so hungry for money that they even stole things from each other. One day, Tom Walker was returning home through a dark forest. He walked slowly and carefully so that he would not fall into a pool of mud. At last, he reached a piece of dry ground. Tom sat down on a tree that had fallen. As he rested, he dug into the earth with a stick. He knew the story that Indians had killed prisoners here as sacrifices to the devil. But this did not trouble him. The only devil Tom was afraid of was his wife. Tom's stick hit something hard. He dug it out of the earth. It was a human skull. In the skull was an Indian axe. Suddenly, Tom Walker heard an angry voice. "Don't touch that skull!" Tom looked up. He saw a giant sitting on a broken tree. Tom had never seen such a man. He wore the clothes of an Indian. His skin was almost black and covered with ashes. His eyes were big and red. His black hair stood up from his head. He carried a large axe. The giant asked, "What are you doing on my land?" But Tom Walker was not afraid. He answered, "What do you mean? This land belongs to Mr. Peabody." The strange man laughed and pointed to the tall trees. Tom saw that one of the trees had been cut by an axe. He looked more closely and saw that the name Peabody had been cut into the tree. Mr. Peabody was a man who got rich by stealing from Indians. Tom looked at the other trees. Every one had the name of some rich, important man from Massachusetts. Tom looked at the tree on which he was sitting. It also had a name cut into it, the name of Absalom Crowninshield. Tom remembered that Mr. Crowninshield was a very rich man. People said he got his money, as Captain Kidd did, by stealing ships. Suddenly the giant shouted, "Crowninshield is ready to be burned. I'm going to burn many trees this winter." Tom told the man that he had no right to cut Mr. Peabody's trees. The stranger laughed and said, "I have every right to cut these trees. This land belonged to me a long time before Englishmen came to Massachusetts. The Indians were here. Then you Englishmen killed the Indians. Now I show Englishmen how to buy and sell slaves, and I teach their women how to be witches." Tom Walker now knew that the giant was the devil himself. But Tom Walker was still not afraid. The giant said Captain Kidd had buried great treasures under the trees, but nobody could have them unless the giant permitted it. He said Tom could have these treasures, but Tom had to agree to give the giant what he demanded. Tom Walker loved money as much as he loved life, but he asked for time to think. Tom went home. He told his wife what had happened. She wanted Captain Kidd's treasure. She urged him to give the devil what he wanted. Tom said no. At last, Mrs. Walker decided to do what Tom refused to do. She put all her silver in a large piece of cloth and went to see the dark giant. 2 days passed. She did not return home. She was never seen again. People said later that Tom went to the place where he had met the giant. He saw his wife's cloth hanging in a tree. He was happy because he wanted to get her silver. But when he opened the cloth, there was no silver in it, only a human heart. Tom was sorry he lost the silver, but not sorry he lost his wife. He wanted to thank the giant for this, and so every day he looked for the giant. Tom finally decided that he would give the giant what he wanted in exchange for Captain Kidd's treasure. One night, Tom Walker met the giant and offered his soul in exchange for Captain Kidd's treasure. The devil now wanted more than that. He said that Tom would have to use the treasure to do the devil's work. He wanted Tom to buy a ship and bring slaves to America. As we have said, Tom Walker was a hard man who loved nothing but money. But even he could not agree to buy and sell human beings as slaves. He refused to do this. The devil then said that his second most important work was lending money. The men who did this work for the devil forced poor people who borrowed money to pay back much more than they had received. Tom said he would like this kind of work. So the devil gave him Captain Kidd's treasure. A few days later, Tom Walker was a lender of money in Boston. Everyone who needed help, and there were many who did, came to him. Tom Walker became the richest man in Boston. When people were not able to pay him, he took away their farms, their horses, and their houses. As he got older and richer, Tom began to worry. What would happen when he died? He had promised his soul to the devil. Maybe he could break that promise. Tom then became very religious. He went to church every week. He thought that if he prayed enough, he could escape from the devil. One day, Tom took the land of a man who had borrowed money. The poor man asked for more time to pay. "Please do not destroy me," he said. "You have already taken all my money." Tom got angry and started to shout, "Let the devil take me if I have taken any money from you." That was the end of Tom Walker. For just then he heard a noise. He opened the door. There was the black giant holding a black horse. The giant said, "Tom, I have come for you." He picked up Tom and put him on the horse. Then he hit the horse, which ran off, carrying Tom. Nobody ever saw Tom Walker again. A farmer said that he saw the black horse with a man on it running wildly into the forest. After Tom Walker disappeared, the government decided to take Tom's property, but there was nothing to take. All the papers which showed that Tom owned land and houses were burned to ashes. His boxes of gold and silver had nothing in them but small pieces of wood. The wood came from newly cut trees. Tom's horses died, and his house suddenly burned to ashes.
You have heard the story, The Devil and Tom Walker. It was written by Washington Irving.
Researchers link gene to need for less sleep.
The next time you think about going without sleep, consider this. Laboratory animals that are kept awake for long periods of time die. Yet sleep scientist Ying-Hua Fu at the University of California, San Francisco says, little is known about the basic need for sleep.
We don't know why some people need more sleep, why some people need less sleep, why when we don't sleep enough we don't function very well. We just don't know much about sleep at all.
But here is something that scientists now know. A team led by Professor Fu has reported the first genetic link to how much sleep we need. The team was looking for a natural clock in the body that controls sleep and wakefulness. What they found was a genetic abnormality. People who have this mutation need less sleep than others. But keep in mind that the scientists say this mutated gene may be rare. The study involved 2 members of an extended family. They did fine on just 6 hours of sleep a day. Studies have shown that, over time, most humans need 8 to 8.5 hours of sleep for the best health. To test their theories, the scientists genetically engineered the mutation in mice. The mice with the mutation needed less sleep than normal mice. They were also more active even after being kept awake. The study appears in the journal Science. The researchers will continue to study the mice to test whether the gene is related to other medical conditions. And they will study whether it is involved in controlling sleep quantity alone, or also what scientists call the wakefulness behavioral drive. This drive is important for getting food, shelter, and mates. How you sleep can be as important as how much you sleep, especially for newborn babies. A new report says images in parenting and women's magazines may send the wrong message about how to put babies to bed. The study found that more than 1/3 of the pictures in women's magazines showed babies in unsafe sleeping positions. They showed babies sleeping on their sides or stomachs. Also, only 1/3 of the pictures showed sleep environments considered safe by the American Academy of Pediatrics. The Academy says babies should sleep on their backs. It says they should be placed on a separate sleeping surface from their parents, without blankets, pillows, or other soft bedding. These guidelines are credited with reducing cases of sudden infant death syndrome in the United States.
Part-time astronomer makes a rare discovery looking at Jupiter.
This week, we will tell about evidence that something big struck the planet Jupiter. We will also tell about a long-ignored organ in the body. And we will tell how scientists are using lobsters to help protect the sea environment.
Space discoveries are usually made by scientists whose job is to study astronomy. After all, they observe the skies with huge ground-based and costly space telescopes. But last month, a computer programmer from Australia made an exciting discovery of an unusual event in Earth's solar system. Anthony Wesley found an unusual dark marking in Jupiter's atmosphere using his amateur telescope. Operators of the Hubble Space Telescope said the dark spot is about 2 times the length of the United States. Scientists believe it is evidence that a large object struck Jupiter, cutting a hole in the atmosphere of the huge gaseous planet.
Mr. Wesley saw the spot near Jupiter's extreme south on July 19th. At first, he thought it was the shadow of one of Jupiter's 4 big moons. He captured images of the spot and studied a picture that he had taken earlier of the same area on Jupiter. When Mr. Wesley was sure he had found something new, he quickly contacted professional astronomers about his find. Lee Fletcher and Glenn Orton were among the first people he told of the discovery. They work for the American Space Agency's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. The Americans had planned to use the infrared telescope facility on top of Hawaii's Mauna Kea volcano the following night. When they used the telescope to create images of the planet, they found an area that appeared dark in light the human eye could see. But using infrared light, the spot appeared bright. That is because the force of the object hitting Jupiter pushed very reflective particles high into the planet's atmosphere.
Astronomers may never know exactly what struck Jupiter. The incident probably took place within a day or two of Mr. Wesley's observation. But scientists think it was either a comet or rock from space. Reports of solar system objects striking each other are extremely rare, but astronomers have seen a similar collision. It took place exactly 15 years ago. Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 broke up and struck Jupiter. In that event, astronomers were able to observe the icy comet long before it struck the solar system's biggest planet. But the object that struck Jupiter in July is estimated to have been much smaller and harder to see than Comet Shoemaker-Levy. Astronomers say it was probably less than 1 kilometer in size, too small to see from Earth.
The most recent collision with Jupiter brought attention to how the huge planet's gravity affects our solar system. Some scientists have called Jupiter the protector of the inner planets and our own Earth from objects from the outer solar system. But others note that Jupiter's powerful gravitational field can just as easily send an object into Earth's path as push it deeper into space. Frank Marchus is an astronomer with the University of California at Berkeley. He says the surprise collision clearly justifies the need for programs that search the skies for small space objects that could threaten Earth.
The spleen was once known in Western literature as an organ that caused a person to be sleepless and sad. For example, in his poem Spleen, the 19th century French writer Charles Baudelaire describes a cheerless world where nothing is beautiful. For years, the duties of the spleen were generally not considered very important. In fact, a person whose spleen has been damaged can survive without it. People who suffer severe physical injuries can burst their spleen and have it removed by doctors.
The human spleen is an organ about the size of a closed hand. It is above the stomach, under the ribs on a person's left side. The spleen is part of the body's lymphatic system. This system fights infection and helps keep the body's fluids in balance. A recent report shows that the small organ has a much more important job in the body's defense system than once believed. Researchers at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School wrote the report. It shows that the spleen stores huge numbers of white blood cells called monocytes. Masses of these monocytes leave the spleen in the event of an injury like a heart attack, wound, or infection. They gather in the damaged tissue and help it to heal.
Matthias Narendorf helped to write the report in Science magazine. He describes the monocytes in terms of military language. He says they are like a standing army that you only deploy in times of crisis. Researchers have long known that bone marrow produces and contains monocytes. But the writers of the report knew that the number of monocytes in the bloodstream was too low to explain the millions of them present after an injury to the heart. They discovered that the additional monocytes were coming from the spleen.
The researchers used mice to carry out an experiment. They studied what areas of the spleen store the monocytes, and they gave the mice heart attacks to study the deployment of monocytes from the spleen. This information about the spleen brings new meaning to a report published in 1977. At that time, researchers studied more than 700 American soldiers who had had their spleens removed because of battle injuries. They also studied a similar-sized group of soldiers who had suffered injuries but kept their spleens. The soldiers without spleens were 2 times as likely to die of heart disease as the soldiers who still had their spleens.
Kelp is a form of large brown seaweed. It grows in watery forests in a number of areas. Kelp forests provide a protected home and food for many kinds of sea life. Scientists once thought that these forests existed only in moderate and cold climates. 2 years ago, however, they were also found in warm ocean waters near Ecuador. Finding kelp forests is usually a welcome discovery. Some economies depend on fishing for lobsters, rockfish, or other creatures that need the forests. People harvest kelp to get alginic acid. The substance is used in toothpaste and medicine for stomach problems. And people active in water sports like to dive and row boats in kelp forests.
However, a small, colorful creature called the long-spined sea urchin is destroying kelp in some areas. The urchin is shaped like a ball. It also has sharp, finger-like spines. For example, urchins are ruining coral reefs in waters near Australia. Scientists at the University of Tasmania say the urchins are wrecking areas in which many fish and shellfish grow. The scientists say abalone and lobsters are among the urchins' victims. But the lobsters are fighting back. The scientists say 750 large rock lobsters were released a year ago in waters near Tasmania's northeast coast. University of Tasmania scientist Scott Ling says there is evidence that they have been eating the sea urchins. More lobsters are being placed in waters that scientists consider at high risk in Tasmania's southeast. Mr. Ling says the hope is that they will prevent further development of sea urchins. The lobsters are identified with markers and colored dye, so fishermen will not catch them. And the fishermen are said to be cooperating.
The American state of California is another area where long-spined sea urchins have been destroying kelp forests. Southern California has lost 90% of its watery forests since the 1960s. The state has employed divers to remove urchins along its southern coast. They are being moved to a new home about 1.5 kilometers away. The job is not easy. Currents are strong, and the creatures sometimes cut the skin of the divers. But the diving team has been doing its work 2 times a week. On one recent day, 1,500 sea urchins got a new home in deeper water, and many kelp forests now have a more secure future.
Watching out for wicked plants.
Just because a plant looks nice does not mean you should eat it. Farmers learn this lesson tragically sometimes when their animals feed on wild plants. In fact, some of the nicest-looking plants in the world are best enjoyed from a distance. A good example is belladonna.
Come in out of the darkness. Oh,
belladonna, like in the Stevie Nicks song,
Don't change, baby, please don't change.
is a beautiful woman in Italian. The plant is also beautiful. It has flowers like stars and shiny berries that start out green and turn purple to black. But every part of it is poisonous. Other names for belladonna include devil's herb and deadly nightshade. Yet just because something is dangerous does not always mean it is all bad. Belladonna and other poison plants have a long history of medical use. The common or purple foxglove produces pretty flowers along a tall leafy stem called a spike. Foxglove can cause heart failure, yet the plant is part of a group called digitalis that is used in medicine to treat heart problems. Weeds with names like coast fiddleneck, common cocklebur, low larkspur, and common groundsel all present risks to people or animals. Recently, there was news that a shopper at a market in northern Germany found small amounts of groundsel in bags of mixed salad. The average person would probably not have recognized it, but this person knew about poisonous plants. Many people happily recognize oleander. The evergreen shrub produces beautiful flowers, white, red, pink, and other colors. But officials in Southern California say someone recently poisoned more than 20 show horses by mixing oleander in their feed. Local newspapers say the horses have recovered. Amy Stewart is a best-selling author of books about the good and bad in nature. She lives in Northern California and raises a poison garden of her own. Her newest book is called Wicked Plants. So which plant does she consider the deadliest of all?
Tobacco has killed more people than any other plant I could find. I mean, 90 million people have died because of tobacco.
Eunice Kennedy Shriver, 1921 to 2009, she changed the world for people with mental disabilities.
Today, we tell about Eunice Kennedy Shriver. She was a member of one of the most famous families in American politics. She used her influence to make a difference in the lives of millions of people. Though she never ran for office, she spent her life energetically working to improve the lives of people with developmental problems. Eunice Shriver was best known for creating the Special Olympics, an athletic event for people with mental disabilities. Her efforts changed the way the world thinks about the mentally disabled.
You are the stars, and the world is watching you. By your presence, you send a message to every village, every city, every nation. A message of hope, a message of victory. The right to play on any playing field, you have earned it. The right to study in any school, you have earned it. The right to hold a job, you have earned it. The right to be anyone's neighbor, you have earned it.
That was Eunice Kennedy Shriver speaking at the 1987 Special Olympics Games in South Bend, Indiana. She was a thin and energetic woman with a huge smile and great spirit. Ms. Shriver officially became involved in helping people with developmental problems when she became the executive vice president of a family organization in 1957. The Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. Foundation was created in 1946 to honor her oldest brother, who died fighting in World War II. Under her guidance, the foundation turned its attention to studying the causes of mental disabilities. It also sought to improve the way society treats people with such disabilities. The foundation also started centers for the study of medical ethics at Harvard University and Georgetown University.
Eunice Shriver and her family had a personal reason to be interested in this issue. Her older sister, Rosemary Kennedy, was born mentally retarded. As Rosemary grew older, she became increasingly difficult to live with and supervise. When she was in her 20s, her father arranged for her to have an operation on her brain to improve her mental condition. But the operation left her completely disabled. Her family later sent her to a care center, where she lived until her death in 2005.
In the past, mental disability was generally treated as a shameful and hopeless disease. Many families secretly sent their disabled children to grow up in institutions, and there were almost no community activities, resources, or jobs for the mentally disabled. They were shut away with little respect and few civil rights. Eunice Shriver changed this. She showed the world that the mentally disabled could be useful citizens enjoying rich lives.
Eunice Mary Kennedy was born in Brookline, Massachusetts in 1921. She was the fifth of 9 children born to the Irish Catholic family of Joseph and Rose Kennedy. Her grandfather was John Fitzgerald, who served as mayor of Boston, Massachusetts, and as a lawmaker. Eunice's father was a wealthy businessman with powerful connections. The Kennedys raised their children to be highly intelligent and highly competitive.
Eunice Kennedy Shriver once said that her father's advice to his children was to win. He said that coming in second or third did not count, but one had to win, win, win. Mr. Kennedy also told his friends that his sons would one day run for president. And he was right. John F. Kennedy became president in 1961 and served until his murder 2 years later. Robert Kennedy, a senator, ran for president in 1968 and was killed that same year. Edward Kennedy never won the presidency, but became a long-serving and important member of the United States Senate.
Eunice Shriver also carried on the family tradition of public service. She graduated in 1943 with a sociology degree from Stanford University in California. She worked for different organizations as a social worker before working for her family's foundation. Over the years, she also worked for the political campaigns of her brothers, John, Robert, and Edward. In 1953, she married R. Sargent Shriver. They had 5 children: Robert, Maria, Timothy, Mark, and Anthony.
Under the administration of John F. Kennedy, Eunice Shriver continued her work for her foundation. She influenced her brother to create a committee to study developmental disabilities. This effort led to the creation of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development at the National Institutes of Health. In 1962, Ms. Shriver published an important article in the Saturday Evening Post called Hope for Retarded Children. She wrote openly about her sister Rosemary's condition. For years, this had been a closely guarded family secret. Eunice Shriver used Rosemary as an example of how not to treat people with disabilities. Instead, she said people with mental disabilities needed to be treated as useful citizens and given special education and training. She said family members of disabled people had few resources for community support or medical help. She gave examples of parents who struggled to make a better life for their disabled children.
Think of the families, think of the mothers who love their children but feel so desperately alone. Their children have done nothing wrong, committed no crime, and perpetuated no injustice. They are the world's most innocent victims, and they suffer only because they are different.
Ms. Shriver also opened a summer camp that was free of cost for mentally retarded children. The idea for it came when a mother told her that there were no summer camps where she could send her disabled child. So Eunice Shriver did something about it. She started Camp Shriver at her home in Maryland to give disabled children a fun summer program filled with physical activities. Non-disabled children were also welcome to join the camp. She made sure there were a large number of workers to give the necessary attention to all the kids. And she asked students from private schools to volunteer at the camp as helpers. Ms. Shriver was directly involved in all parts of the camp. She would often swim and play ball with the children.
Don't keep them away from something that can change their lives and give them a new vision and give their parents a new vision of them just because they don't want somebody in the community to say, oh, my child, your child is special.
In 1968, Eunice Shriver organized the first Special Olympics in Chicago, Illinois.
In ancient Rome, the gladiators went into the arena with these words on their lips: let me win, but if I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt. Today, all of you young athletes are in the arena. Many of you will win, but even more important, I know you will be brave and bring credit to your parents and to your country. Let us begin the Olympics. Thank you.
About 1,000 competitors from 26 states and Canada took part in the event. They competed in running, swimming, and hockey. The idea of permitting mentally disabled people to compete in sports was revolutionary at the time. Before, people with special needs were often prevented from physical activity out of concern that they would hurt themselves or be unable to compete. Ms. Shriver said that the Special Olympics proved a very important fact, that exceptional children with mental retardation can be exceptional athletes. Today, the Special Olympics has grown to include about 3 million athletes in more than 150 countries.
Let us not forget that we have miles to go to overturn the prejudice and oppression facing the world's 180 million citizens with intellectual disabilities.
Eunice Kennedy Shriver continued to work for the disabled in other ways. She created an organization called Community for Caring. it works to reduce teenage pregnancies and educate students about creating caring and respectful communities. Ms. Shriver received many awards for her work. These include the French Legion of Honor and the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian honor. Eunice Kennedy Shriver died in August of 2009 after a series of strokes. Her daughter's husband, California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, said that she was the light of the family. And he said her pioneering work for social and scientific improvements changed the lives of millions of developmentally disabled people all over the world.